Shadow Slave. By Guiltythree. Chapter 1320, Childhood's End. Eventually, Anank replaced Nephi's at the steering oar. Neph looked drained after commanding the winds for an entire day. Nevertheless, Sunny felt that her eyes were duller than mere exhaustion could explain. Throwing a questioning glance at her, he asked, "Are you all right?" She lingered for a few moments, then nodded silently. Sitting down and leaning her back against the side of the ketch, Nephi's then tiredly closed her eyes. She had not slept since they left Weave, and although masters like them could easily remain awake for days, mental fatigue still had a way of catching up to them. "I guess she doesn't want to talk about whatever it is that's troubling her." Sunny studied Neph's pale face, then quietly summoned Nightmare and ordered him to guard her dreams. The tenebrous steed hid in the shadows at the bow of the boat, formless and watchful. Not satisfied with that, Sunny sent all but one of his shadows to augment him. Memories of meeting the manifestation of the Prince of Madness still haunted his thoughts. Later, there was nothing for him to do but continue weaving threads of essence. Sunny sat on the deck of the ketch with his legs crossed, his fingers dancing in the air. By now, he was proficient enough in creating essence strings to not pay a lot of attention to the process. It was a far cry from when he had attempted weaving for the first time and constantly cut his hands to the bone. His painfully gained experience and the increased sensitivity that bone weave granted to his fingertips made it easier. Now, Sunny just needed time and essence to create as long a thread as he needed to weave a memory. It still took some time. After a while, Anank looked at him with curiosity and asked, "My lord, if you don't mind me asking, what are you doing?" Sunny remained silent for a few moments, then turned his head slightly. He hesitated before answering, knowing how weird she was about all things involving the demon of fate. Nevertheless, eventually, he said, "I am creating essence strings." Weaving. Her azure eyes widened slightly. You are a weaver, my lord." "A weaver?" Sunny tilted his head. "If you mean someone who uses weaver sorcery, then yes. Although I am not very proficient with it." The young priestess was staring at him with reverence. He sighed. "Why, were these weavers very rare in your time?" She nodded slowly. "Extremely so, my lord. The sorcery created by the demon of fate was not something mortals could easily learn. Or gods, even. There were only a few who mastered it. One of the two high priests of the nightmare spell was one such sorcerer. My mother told me that he was a shaper of souls and a master of all kinds of magic. Are there a lot of weavers like you in the future?" Sunny slowly shook his head. "No. There are a few whose aspects allow them to create memories, but as far as I know, I am the only one who truly knows how to weave sorcery, unbound by the limits of my abilities." He sighed. "I never had a teacher, though. Everything I know, I've learned myself. That is why I can only create copies of the weaves created by the spell, or modify them at best." The young priestess looked at him silently for a while, then smiled. "But, my lord, wouldn't that mean that the nightmare spell is your teacher? How can there be a better teacher than that?" The corner of his mouth twitched. Suddenly grim, Sunny looked away. "I guess. The spell has taught me a great deal of things, indeed." Anank's smile widened. "You are beloved by fate, then." "I feel at ease." He hid his face, not wanting her to see the dark resentment drowning his eyes. "Beloved by fate, huh?" Sunny was indeed fated. However, that did not mean that fate was especially kind to him. It just meant that he was wrapped in its strings like a helpless puppet, doomed to always be at its mercy. In a sense, it meant that he would never know peace. Not until he learned how to rip those strings apart. It's much more like I am cursed by it. But then again, wasn't his fate to become defiled, tear his face with his nails, and turn into a mad abomination? Wasn't that his future? Sunny shuddered, remembering that frightening possibility. No way. I would rather die. I will die, if this is the only outcome. That stupid theory of mine has to be wrong. The Mad Prince. I will never become him. Closing his eyes for a moment, he calmed his wildly beating heart and concentrated on weaving essence strings once again. However, his fingers trembled as he did. By the time the 7 suns touched the surface of the flowing water, the swift ketch reached the second of the 7 houses. Mooring the boat to its pier, they camped for the night on the forlorn island. It looked like a place where life had thrived once, but now, that vitality was gone. The children were gone, the parents were gone. And soon enough, the 7 houses would be gone, too, swallowed by the eternal currents of the great river. In the morning, Sunny was awoken by the creaking of the windcatchers. After giving Anank some time to take a walk along the shore and remember the days of her childhood, they left the artificial islands and sailed downstream once again. It took them another day to pass the 3rd house. By then, Anank's appearance had changed once again. She used to look only slightly older than Sunny and Nephi's in Weave, but now, it was as if she was of the same age as them, or even younger. By the time the swift ketch reached the 4th house, she seemed to be in her late teens. The mood inside the ketch had turned dark. Looking at the endearing adolescent face of the young priestess, it was impossible to deny that they would have to leave her behind. Soon. The house of parting was not that far away anymore. Before they reached it, though, they had to pass by the last 3 of the 7 houses. However, by the time they were supposed to come in view of the 5th, Anank's expression had turned tense. Because the artificial island was nowhere to be found. Chapter 1321, Drowning Island. Sunny and Nephi's had learned a few things about navigating the endlessly flowing waters of the great river, but they were still unsure what distance separated each of the 7 houses from each other. Nevertheless, they quickly understood that something was wrong by looking at Anank's face. The young priestess was almost always either calm or smiling. At some point, however, a deep frown twisted her soft adolescent face, and a dark shadow was cast onto her vibrant azure eyes. Sunny was the first to notice. He studied the teenage girl in front of them, then asked, "What's wrong?" Anank lingered for a few moments. "We should have reached the 3rd house by now, my lord. There were 7 artificial islands where the children of Weave spent their childhood, and although the swift ketch was supposed to reach the 5th one, they were actually numbered in reverse order, starting with the house of birth far downstream and ending with the house of youth. So, the 3rd house would have been the 5th they saw. However, it seemed to have disappeared. The young priestess studied the vast expanse of the great river, then mumbled with uncertainty, "I guess the mechanisms of the island could have broken down, sending it adrift. I haven't visited here in a long while. Still, the deterioration shouldn't have reached that stage already." Sunny and Nephi's exchanged glances. Rising to her feet, Nephi's looked north. Could it have been destroyed by an abomination? Anank did not answer for a while. Eventually, she sighed. "It's unlikely, but not impossible. Maybe that is what happened, indeed." The ketch continued to fly downstream, but the mood of its 3 passengers had changed. Not only was there a threat of a powerful nightmare creature stalking the waters somewhere nearby, but the disappearance of one of the islands also meant that the rest of them could be gone, as well. Damnation. Sunny did not particularly care about the remaining 2 of the 7 houses, but he was concerned about the lower house of parting, the point where Anank was supposed to say farewell to them. The young priestess was intending to gift them her ketch, so she needed another vessel in order to return to Weave. There were supposed to be other boats moored at the house of parting, but if the island had been destroyed, they were going to have a problem. It's not too bad. The furthest island ship of Weave might not have been destroyed. Even if it was, Sunny could assume the form of the river serpent again, continuing to travel downstream without the ketch. With the crown of twilight, he would be able to sustain that form for longer. But not long enough to reach fallen grace. There were less powerful abominations in the past, though. Perhaps he and Nephi's would be able to come up with a method to stay safe while he replenished his essence. There was nothing to do for now. First, they needed to reach the house of parting and see whether it was still in one piece or not. They continued sailing downstream in grim silence. The 7 suns had already plunged into the great river, suffusing it with a soft glow, when Sunny suddenly stirred and peered into the distance. A few moments later, he pointed forward and said, his voice somber, "I see something. There." Anank silently moved the steering oar, guiding the ketch in that direction. A dozen minutes later, a dark shape became visible in the iridescent glow of the flowing water. It was massive and strangely shaped, rising above the surface of the river like a mountain. Without having to say anything, Nephi's and Sunny summoned their weapons. Anank called upon her harpoon, as well. However, they weren't in danger. As the ketch drew closer to the ominous shape, they saw it for what it was. A shattered platform built upon the frame of some leviathan's bones was sticking out of the water, tilted and half-drowned. They first saw one of its sides, overgrown by seaweed and barnacles. It took Sunny some time to realize that he was looking at the bottom of an island ship. Soon, enormous water wheels came into sight, motionless and broken, hanging high in the air. Finally, they went around the edge of the drowning island and saw the side of it that was supposed to be the surface. The bright buildings, those of them that remained above the water, had mostly collapsed into piles of rubble. The gardens had been destroyed, and the tidy streets had turned into a labyrinth of ruins. The tall wind catchers had been shattered, their blades sticking out of the river like torn sails. It was what remained of the third house. Looking at the scene of violent devastation, Sunny felt a cold shiver run down his spine. What could have destroyed it so thoroughly? It seemed as though a frenzied titan had been let loose on the floating island. Nephi's gripped the hilt of her sword tighter. Her face was motionless, but white sparks were dancing in her eyes. An abomination. Anank remained silent, studying the ruins with a dark expression. Eventually, she shook her head. I don't know, my lady. Let's leave this place as soon as possible. Despite her true age and her youthful appearance, the priestess was not a very good liar. Sunny could tell that she was keeping some suspicion to herself. But since Anank did not want to speak of it, he decided not to press the issue, for now. He trusted her that much, at least. The young priestess let Nephi's take the steering oar and went to the bow of the ketch, still holding her harpoon. The ketch sailed past the ruins of the devastated house, giving them an opportunity to study how utter its destruction had been. None of them said anything, but all three looked somber and uneasy. Finally, they left the drowning island behind and continued moving with the current of the great river. An hour passed in tense silence, then another. Despite Sunny's fears, no monstrous dweller of the depths attacked the small ketch. After a while, the first of the 7 suns appeared from beneath the waters. The impenetrable darkness released its hold upon the sky, and a new day came, as bright and beautiful as all the rest of them. However, there was something different about this one. When all 7 suns had risen from the water, Sunny noticed that far ahead of them, in the distance, the darkness still remained. It veiled the northern horizon like a wall, connecting the surface of the great river to the sky. Anank was staring at the distant wall of darkness, too, her youthful face pale. He scowled. What is it? Some ancient abomination manifesting its power? A defiled. The young priestess pursed her lips, then slowly shook her head. No, my lord. It's much worse. It is. A storm. Her melodious voice sounded solemn. A time storm. Chapter 13:22, Broken Time. The ominous words hung in the air, as foreboding as the wall of darkness veiling the sky far in the distance. Sunny and Nephi's looked at Anank, wary because of her somber expression. This was the first time either of them had seen the young priestess show signs of despondence. The three of them must have made for a funny sight. 2 battle-hardened warriors staring at a teenage girl, waiting for her guidance. Sunny frowned. A time storm. Anank nodded slowly. Yes, my lord. I have told you before that time can be unpredictable on the great river. There are places where it turns stale and unmoving, great whirlpools that nothing can ever escape, clashing currents, and deadly tides of all kinds. A time storm is one of the most dangerous anomalies one can encounter. Her youthful face darkened. It is a wandering disaster that twists and rips time apart, containing within itself absolute chaos. These storms originate from the span of the great river that corresponds to the final days of the Doom War, when the last cataclysmic battles between the demons and the gods were fought, and when both sides perished. They usually don't reach that far upstream. I am sorry. Nephi shook her head. You don't need to be sorry, Anank. It is not your fault. However, how do we escape it? The young priestess lingered for a few moments, then said quietly, I am not sure that we can. She uttered several words, easily overpowering Neph's shaping. The wind that had been filling the sails of the ketch disappeared, and a moment later, a powerful gale crushed into the wooden boat, making it creak. This one was not summoned by anyone. Much worse. It was blowing from downstream, pushing their hair back. Which meant that the dark wall devouring the horizon was traveling in their direction. At least a normal storm would. Judging by Anank's expression, a time storm behaved the same. Sunny uttered a silent curse. Can we outrun it? The young priestess swiftly moved to the side of the ketch and looked down, at the clear water flowing past the polished wood. A few moments later, she gritted her teeth. I don't think so, my lord. We are already caught in its outer reaches. It was only then that Sunny noticed that the current of the great river seemed to have grown much stronger. It was hard to tell when the ketch was flying forward at full speed, but now that it slowed down and was about to come to a halt, the changes were apparent even for an outsider like himself. The wind was chasing the storm in their direction, while the current was pulling them into the storm. It was like a trap. Damn it. What do we do, then? Anank stared at the approaching wall of the storm with a dark expression. A few moments later, she took a deep breath and forced out a smile. We will just have to brave it then, my lord and lady. Sunny and Nephi stared at the teenage girl with stumped expressions. Hadn't she said that a time storm was a roving mass of chaotic time, wild and distorted enough to be absolutely deadly? The third house had been much larger and infinitely more robust than their small ketch, but it was utterly destroyed. How the hell were they supposed to survive something like that? The young priestess shook her head. It is not as bad as it sounds. I am a transcendent, after all. We, the followers of Weaver, had to pass through the tumultuous region from where these storms originate on our way upstream, so we know a thing or two about how to endure them. Her voice sounded confident, but the look in her eyes was anything but. Noticing their doubt, Anank sighed. I am reasonably certain that I can keep this small ketch from being torn apart. It is lucky, actually, that our vessel is not too large. However, she stared at the wall of darkness that had already drawn closer in the few minutes they were talking, and grew solemn. It is very important that none of us touches the water or becomes separated from the ketch. This storm front we see is only the aftereffect of the true disaster. The real horror lies beneath the waves, in the depths of water. No one can survive being pulled down by the raging currents of broken time. If you fall into the river, you will never come back. Sunny grimaced. His hope of being able to salvage the situation by turning into the river serpent had just been crushed. Now, his only choice was to trust Anank to see them through the disaster. It was not that he didn't trust her. But Sunny suddenly remembered traversing the dark sea of the forgotten shore on the shoulder of the walking colossus. There had been a storm then, too. And a harrowing creature hiding within the storm. His expression crumbled. There are no ancient abominations hiding in that wall of darkness, are there? Anank looked at him with surprise, then shook her head with a smile. No, my lord. Even the defiled can't survive the broken time. They avoid these storms just as we do. Sunny sighed and looked downstream with a bleak face. After a while, he asked in a dull voice, we should prepare for a rocky ride, then. The young priestess nodded. Indeed. My lord is wise. He was not even in the mood to celebrate getting another praise. Shaking his head, Sunny started stretching his body, then froze, realizing how senseless his actions were. They were not preparing for a battle. Sharp swords and sturdy armor were not going to help them survive the storm, and neither would their combat skills. Sighing again, he asked, what exactly do we need to do? With no time to waste, Anank directed them on how to help her prepare the ketch for braving the storm. She tried to sound calm, but hints of urgency found their way into her voice. The preparations did not take long. They lowered the sails, then folded them neatly. As it turned out, both masts of the ketch could be taken down, as well. After dismantling them, everything was either stored under the deck of the wooden boat or fastened tightly in place. 10 minutes later, nothing that could be easily torn or broken by the wind remained. The ketch turned from a sailboat into a simple and barren vessel, seemingly too small to survive a terrible storm, but also solid enough to look like it, maybe, could. The three of them stood on the empty deck, looking north. The wall of darkness was approaching.